The island looked insignificant on a map, just a small volcanic rock in the vast Pacific. But in early 1945, Iwo Jima became one of the most strategically vital points in the entire war. Sitting roughly halfway between the Mariana Islands and mainland Japan, it served as an early warning station for incoming American bombers and a critical base for Japanese fighter interceptions. Every time American B-29 bombers flew toward Tokyo, Japanese radar operators on Iwo Jima could alert the mainland, giving defenders precious time to prepare. For the United States, capturing the island meant silencing that warning system and gaining an emergency landing site for damaged bombers. For Japan, losing it meant exposing the homeland. But what made Iwo Jima truly terrifying was not its location, it was how it was defended. Unlike previous island battles, where Japanese forces often launched desperate banzai charges or defended beaches to the last man, the commander on Iwo Jima, General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, chose a radically different approach. He understood something many others did not. Japan could not win a conventional battle against the overwhelming firepower of the United States. Instead, he planned to turn Iwo Jima into a fortress designed not to stop the invasion, but to bleed it dry. Kuribayashi forbade suicidal charges. Every soldier was ordered to fight intelligently, patiently, and from concealment. The goal was simple and chilling. Kill as many Americans as possible, delay them for as long as possible, and make the cost of victory so high that it would shake the resolve of the United States. To achieve this, he transformed the island itself into a weapon. Beneath the black volcanic ash and jagged rock, thousands of Japanese soldiers worked tirelessly, digging an elaborate underground network that stretched for miles. This was not a collection of simple bunkers, it was a fully interconnected system of tunnels, chambers, firing positions, and hidden artillery sites. By the time the Americans arrived, more than 11 miles of tunnels linked key defensive positions across the island, allowing troops to move unseen, resupply safely, and launch attacks from unexpected directions. Machine gun nests were buried deep into hillsides, artillery pieces were hidden behind reinforced doors that could open, fire, and close again before counterfire could hit them. Even Mount Suribachi, the island's dominant volcano, was hollowed out with tunnels and firing ports. From the outside, the island looked quiet, almost empty, but beneath the surface, it was alive with defenders waiting for the right moment to strike. When American forces began their assault preparations, they believed they could soften the island with overwhelming firepower. For days, naval ships bombarded Iwo Jima with thousands of tons of explosives. Aircraft dropped bombs across its surface, turning much of the landscape into a scorched wasteland. From a distance, it appeared nothing could survive such destruction. But Kuribayashi had anticipated this. His defenses were built to withstand exactly that kind of attack. Deep underground, protected by layers of rock and reinforced structures, most of his troops remained largely unharmed. They waited in silence as the bombardment raged above them. They conserved ammunition, they held their fire, and most importantly, they did not reveal their positions. So, when the bombardment finally stopped, American commanders believed the island had been crippled. They were wrong. On February 19, 1945, thousands of U.S. Marines began landing on Iwo Jima's beaches. At first, something felt off. There was no immediate resistance, no machine gun fire, no artillery, just the sound of boots sinking into soft volcanic ash, making movement slow and exhausting. Vehicles struggled to gain traction. Men advanced cautiously, unsure of what was coming. Then, suddenly, the island erupted. From hidden bunkers, camouflaged positions, and unseen openings in the ground, Japanese forces unleashed a coordinated and devastating barrage. Machine guns cut through the beaches, mortars and artillery rained down with deadly precision. What had seemed like an empty island transformed into a killing zone in seconds. The Americans had faced fierce resistance before, but nothing like this. Traditional tactics quickly began to fail. Naval bombardments had not destroyed the defenses. Airstrikes had not neutralized the enemy. Even direct assaults against visible positions proved costly because destroying one bunker meant nothing. Japanese soldiers would simply reappear from another hidden entrance or emerge from tunnels behind advancing troops. Every yard gained came at a high price. Flamethrowers, grenades, and explosives were used to clear positions, but the enemy was always deeper, always hidden, always waiting. The interconnected tunnel system allowed Japanese forces to retreat, regroup, and counterattack in ways that confused and frustrated American units. It was not just a battle against soldiers, it was a battle against the island itself. And that was exactly what Kuribayashi intended. He had turned Iwo Jima into something more than a defensive position. He had created a battlefield designed to absorb punishment, conceal its strength, and strike back with deadly efficiency. The longer the battle went on, the more it became clear this would not be a quick victory. It would be a brutal test of endurance, strategy, and innovation. Because to defeat an enemy you cannot see, hiding in a fortress beneath your feet, conventional weapons might not be enough.
What the American forces faced on Iwo Jima was unlike anything they had encountered before. Days into the battle, it became painfully clear that conventional tactics were not enough. Artillery strikes flattened the surface, but the enemy remained alive underground. Infantry assaults captured ground, but at a devastating cost. Every bunker destroyed seemed to be replaced by another. Every advance met with hidden fire from unseen positions. The island was not just defended, it was engineered to resist everything the Americans had. Commanders began to realize that something different was needed. Not just more firepower, but a new kind of weapon, one that could reach into the tunnels, into the caves, into the hidden spaces where Japanese defenders were protected. Something that could do what bombs and bullets could not. The idea itself was not entirely new. Flamethrowers had already been used in earlier battles across the Pacific. Portable versions carried by infantry had proven effective in clearing bunkers and caves, but they came with serious limitations. They had short range, exposed the operator to extreme danger, and carried limited fuel. Against a defensive network as vast and complex as Iwo Jima's, handheld flamethrowers were simply not enough. What was needed was scale, protection, and reach. The solution began to take shape far from the battlefield in Hawaii, where U.S. Navy Seabees, military engineers known for their ingenuity, were already experimenting with modifications to armored vehicles. Their idea was bold. Take a standard M4A3 Sherman tank and transform it into a mobile flamethrower platform. Instead of relying solely on its main gun, the tank would be equipped with a powerful flame projection system capable of delivering sustained bursts of burning fuel over long distances. It could fire repeatedly, maintain pressure, and operate under armor protection. In essence, it turned the tank into something entirely new, a weapon designed specifically for destroying fortified positions. Secrecy surrounded the project. These modified tanks were not widely discussed even among American forces preparing for the invasion. Only a small number were produced initially, and their deployment was carefully planned. The men who operated them underwent specialized training, learning not just how to use the weapon, but how to coordinate with infantry units in close combat situations. Because this weapon, powerful as it was, required precision. Flamethrower tanks were not meant to operate alone. They were designed to work alongside Marines on the ground, advancing together, identifying targets and eliminating them one by one. A hidden bunker, once located, could be engaged from a safer distance. Instead of sending soldiers directly into deadly fire, the tank could project burning fuel into openings, trenches, and cave entrances, forcing defenders out or eliminating them inside. By early 1945, a small number of these tanks, often nicknamed Zippo tanks by the troops, were ready.
Their nickname came from the famous cigarette lighter, a reference to their ability to ignite anything in front of them with terrifying efficiency. But despite their potential, they remained largely untested in a battle as intense as Iwo Jima. Everything would depend on how they performed under real conditions. As the invasion unfolded and casualties mounted, the urgency to deploy these new weapons grew. Marines on the front lines were pinned down by unseen enemies. Progress was slow, measured in yards rather than miles. Every strong point had to be dealt with individually, often at great cost. The need for a breakthrough was becoming critical. And so, the decision was made. These flamethrower tanks would be brought into the fight. When they first appeared on the battlefield, they did not look dramatically different from standard Shermans, but their effect would be anything but ordinary. For the first time, American forces had a weapon capable of reaching into the very heart of the Japanese defensive system, into the tunnels, the caves, into the hidden spaces where Japanese defenders were protected. Something that could do what bombs and bullets could not. It was not just a new tool, it was a shift in how the battle would be fought. Because against an enemy that refused to come out into the open, the Americans were about to bring the fire directly to them.
By the time the battle for Iwo Jima entered its first full days, the scale of the challenge had become undeniable. The beaches were already crowded with men, equipment, and wounded soldiers, all under constant threat. The black volcanic sand made every movement exhausting. Vehicles struggled to advance, sinking into the soft terrain. And all the while, the enemy remained mostly invisible, striking from concealed positions with precision and discipline. The initial landings had given a false impression, just a brief moment of eerie silence before the storm. Now that storm showed no signs of stopping. American forces pushed inland, but progress was painfully slow. Every ridge, every mound of earth, every broken piece of terrain could conceal a machine gun nest or a hidden artillery position. Japanese defenders waited patiently, often holding their fire until Marines were fully exposed, then unleashing devastating barrages that pinned units down and inflicted heavy casualties within seconds. Communication was difficult, visibility was limited, and the battlefield itself seemed alive with danger. In this chaos, the need for a breakthrough became urgent. Infantry alone could not continue advancing at such a cost. Even coordinated artillery and air support were not enough to neutralize deeply buried defenses. The battle risked turning into a prolonged stalemate, exactly what General Kuribayashi had intended. Then, a new element entered the fight. The flamethrower tanks were brought forward. At first, their arrival did not immediately change the atmosphere. They moved slowly, carefully, often guided by infantry units who had already identified enemy positions. But once they were put into action, their impact became unmistakable. The first time one of these tanks engaged a fortified bunker, the effect was immediate and shocking. Instead of exchanging fire with an unseen enemy, the tank advanced within range and released a long, pressurized stream of burning fuel directly into the opening. The flame did not just strike the surface, it flowed inside, filling the confined space with intense heat and fire. For defenders inside, there was little chance of escape. What had previously required multiple soldiers, grenades, and close-range assaults could now be accomplished from a safer distance. Bunkers that had resisted repeated attacks were neutralized in moments. Cave entrances that once served as deadly ambush points became vulnerable. For the Marines fighting on the ground, this was more than just a new weapon, it was a shift in momentum. But for the Japanese defenders, it was something entirely different. They had prepared for artillery, they had prepared for airstrikes, they had prepared for infantry assaults, but this was something they had not fully anticipated. Their defensive system, built on concealment and endurance, suddenly faced a weapon that could penetrate directly into its core. The psychological impact was immediate. Positions that had held firm under bombardment were now under threat from a weapon that could not be easily avoided once deployed. The tunnels, once a source of safety, could become traps. Smoke and heat spread quickly through enclosed spaces, turning carefully constructed defenses into hazards. Yet even in the face of this, the resistance did not collapse. Japanese forces adapted as best they could, continuing to fight from alternate positions, emerging from secondary tunnel exits, and launching counterattacks when opportunities appeared. The battle remained intense, and every advance still came at a cost. But now, the Americans had a tool that could directly challenge the island's underground defenses. Coordination became critical. Infantry units worked closely with the flamethrower tanks, identifying targets and protecting the vehicles from close-range threats. The tanks, in turn, provided a form of support that had not existed before, clearing paths, reducing strong points, and allowing Marines to move forward with slightly less risk. Still, nothing about the battle was easy. The terrain remained unforgiving, the enemy remained determined, and every gain had to be secured carefully because Japanese defenders could reappear from unexpected directions at any moment. Even after a bunker was cleared, it had to be sealed or destroyed completely to prevent it from being reused. The fight was relentless, stretching across days that felt much longer. But slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the balance began to shift. Positions that once seemed impossible to take were now being reduced. Lines that had been held firmly were beginning to bend. The combination of infantry, artillery, and these new armored flamethrowers started to create pressure that even the deeply entrenched defenses could not fully withstand. It was not a sudden breakthrough. There was no single deciding moment where everything changed at once. Instead, it was a gradual turning of the tide, one bunker, one tunnel, one position at a time. And with each burst of flame sent into the hidden depths of Iwo Jima, the fortress that had seemed nearly impregnable was being challenged in a way it had never faced before.
By the midpoint of the battle, Iwo Jima had become something far more brutal than anyone had expected. There were no clear front lines, no safe zones, no moments of relief. Every part of the island was contested. Every step forward met with resistance. The landscape itself had been transformed into a shattered maze of craters, ash, and hidden death waiting beneath the surface. But now, the strategy of the American forces had evolved. This was no longer about large-scale advances or sweeping assaults. It had become a methodical, almost mechanical process. Identify, isolate, destroy. Every bunker, every cave, every tunnel entrance was treated as an individual battlefield. And at the center of this new approach were the flamethrower tanks. Working in close coordination with infantry units, these tanks began to systematically dismantle the Japanese defensive network. Marines would move cautiously, scanning the terrain for any sign of hidden positions, a slight opening in the rock, an unnatural shadow, a patch of disturbed earth. Once identified, the area would be secured and the tank would be brought forward. What followed was precise and devastating. A controlled burst of flame would be directed into the opening, often followed by additional bursts to ensure the position was fully neutralized. The fuel, thick and burning intensely, could flow into tunnels and enclosed spaces, reaching defenders who believed they were safely hidden. In many cases, the effect extended beyond the immediate target, spreading through interconnected passages and forcing defenders to abandon nearby positions. This process was repeated again and again across the island. Airfields, ridgelines, fortified hills, each became the focus of intense, localized battles. The Americans were not just advancing, they were dismantling an entire defensive system piece by piece. It was slow, exhausting work, but it was effective.
One of the most difficult areas of fighting came in places like what would later be known as Bloody Gorge, a natural defensive position strengthened by man-made fortifications and deeply embedded tunnel systems. Here, the Japanese resistance was especially fierce. Every approach was covered by hidden fire. Every attempt to advance was met with coordinated defense from multiple directions. But even here, the combination of tactics began to show results. Flamethrower tanks would move into position under the protection of infantry, targeting key strong points that controlled access to the area. Once those positions were neutralized, Marines could move forward, securing ground that had previously been unreachable. It was not quick, and it was never easy, but the system worked. For the Japanese defenders, the situation was becoming increasingly difficult. Their strategy relied on endurance, on the ability to remain hidden and continue fighting over an extended period. But as more and more positions were destroyed, as tunnels were sealed or rendered unusable, their ability to coordinate and sustain resistance began to weaken. Supplies became harder to move, communication between units became more dangerous, safe zones disappeared. And perhaps most importantly, the psychological pressure continued to build. The knowledge that no position was truly safe, that at any moment fire could be brought directly into the depths of their defenses, changed the nature of the fight. What had once been a controlled and carefully planned defense was now under constant threat from a weapon that bypassed many of its advantages. Still, the resistance did not break easily. Japanese forces continued to fight with determination, launching sudden counterattacks, emerging from hidden exits, and exploiting any opportunity to strike. Even as their defensive network was being reduced, they remained a dangerous and disciplined enemy. For the American forces, the battles remained costly. Every advance required coordination, patience, and courage. Infantry units had to stay close to the tanks, protecting them from close-range threats, while also exposing themselves to enemy fire. Engineers worked to seal tunnels and destroy fortifications, often under dangerous conditions. Casualties continued to rise, a constant reminder of the intensity of the fight. But despite all of this, progress was being made. What had once seemed like an unbreakable fortress was now being taken apart, one position at a time. The combination of strategy, technology, and relentless pressure was beginning to overcome even the most carefully prepared defenses. The island was still dangerous, the enemy was still present, but the balance had shifted. Iwo Jima was no longer an untouchable stronghold. It was a battlefield being slowly, methodically conquered through fire, coordination, and an unyielding determination to see the fight through to the end.
As the battle for Iwo Jima entered its final phase, the outcome was no longer in doubt, but the cost of that outcome continued to rise. Weeks of relentless fighting had transformed the island into a devastated landscape of ash, shattered rock, and silent ruins. Yet even now, the resistance had not fully ended. American forces had pushed deep into the island, capturing key positions and dismantling much of the defensive network. Airfields were secured, major strongpoints had fallen, and the once tightly coordinated system of tunnels was now fragmented. But the remaining Japanese defenders continued to fight from isolated pockets, refusing to surrender. This final stage of the battle was marked by small, intense engagements rather than large-scale assaults. Groups of defenders cut off from the main network operated independently, launching sudden attacks and making every effort to inflict as much damage as possible before the end. Some hid in caves or concealed positions, emerging at night or when least expected. Others remained underground until discovered. For American troops, the danger was far from over. Every cave had to be checked, every tunnel entrance had to be sealed, every section of ground had to be secured with absolute certainty. The same tactics that had proven effective in earlier stages, coordination between infantry and flamethrower tanks, careful identification of targets, and systematic clearing, were now applied with even greater precision. The flamethrower tanks continued to play a crucial role. In these final days of the battle, they were used to eliminate remaining strongholds that could not be approached safely by infantry alone. Hidden positions that might have taken hours or days to neutralize were reduced in minutes. The tanks provided a level of control over the battlefield that had not existed at the beginning of the invasion. By the time organized resistance finally came to an end in late March 1945, the scale of the battle's cost had become clear. Thousands of American service members had been killed or wounded. Japanese losses were even staggering, with the vast majority of defenders killed in the fighting. The island that had once been a strategic nukta on a map had become one of the most intense and costly battles in the Pacific War. But alongside the heavy losses, there were lasting outcomes. With Iwo Jima secured, the United States gained a critical base for operations against mainland Japan. Damaged bombers returning from missions could now land safely instead of risking the long flight back across the ocean. Fighter escorts could operate more effectively. The island's capture directly contributed to the intensification of air operations in the final months of the war. And beyond its immediate strategic value, the battle changed how war would be fought. The success of the flamethrower tanks demonstrated the importance of adapting to new forms of defense. Traditional methods alone had proven insufficient against deeply fortified and concealed Dushmen. Innovation combined with coordination and persistence had made the difference. Following Iwo Jima, the use of specialized armored vehicles, close infantry support tactics, and methods for clearing fortified positions would continue to evolve. The lessons learned on this island would influence military planning and battlefield strategy for years to come. In the end, the battle for Iwo Jima was not defined by a single moment of victory, but by the slow, determined effort required to achieve it. It was a fight measured in yards, in hours, in lives. A battle where the terrain itself became an enemy, and where overcoming that enemy required not just force, but ingenuity. The island was finally secured, but what happened there would not be forgotten.